Okay, continuing chapter 28 and starting on note number 50. We are talking about the civil rights movement now. So in the 1950s and 60s, Black Americans had made considerable political and economic gains through the civil rights movement. There were conflicts within the Black community about how gains should be made. One group believed that political gains were the most important, and those were led by W.E.B. Du Bois and his philosophies. The other believed that economic gains were most important because through economic gains, political power comes, and that those people were led by, I forgot his name that fast. Wow. Up from slavery. It'll come to me. George Washington Carver worked for him. Booker T. Washington. Thank you. Okay, sometimes my brain takes a circuitous route before the words leave my mouth. But those were the two major Black leaders right after the Civil War, and they had a diametrically opposed idea about how gains should be made. And so people kind of fell in between those two camps. But in the 1950s and 60s, you're going to see a lot of people who are really working to make the political gains the most important, specifically because they are not being protected under the law, and it's making them almost impossible for them to get the economic gains that they need. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruling known as Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, called for desegregation of all public schools after a 7-year-old named Linda Brown was denied admission to a public school specifically because she was Black. She had just moved into the area. Her family tried to get her into the local public school. The local public school said, nope, we don't have a place for her. She is Black. She cannot be in our school. And at that point, the ACLU really is the one that got on board with this with her parents. And they started to look very carefully at the previously passed Plessy versus Ferguson. In Plessy versus Ferguson, which was way before this time, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was legal. It absolutely was, according to the Supreme Court finding. The idea in Plessy versus Ferguson had to do with train cars and waiting rooms in like train stations. And the philosophy of the Supreme Court at the time said that it was okay to have separate facilities for Black than you did for white, as long as those facilities were considered of equal value. So you have separation, separate but equal. Now, for Linda Brown, there is no equal school. There wasn't a school for her. So the ACLU leading this, it took it to the new Supreme Court, because Supreme Court changes every so often because people die and new judges are put in place. The new Supreme Court in 1954 is looking at this and saying, okay, looking back on Plessy versus Ferguson, it's not actually constitutional at all. We are going to strike that from law, and instead we are going to put in Brown versus Board of Education, which calls for desegregation of all public schools, because everybody pays taxes that pay for the public school system. Even though you are going to Calvary Christian School and your parents are paying money to pay for tuition and your books, okay, and that money is not being spent, foolishly. We are using that to pay for air conditioning and heat, lights, desks, chairs, and of course the teacher salaries. We don't get anything from the U.S. government for our school. That's why we have a tuition. And we keep our tuition really, really low, by the way. But according to the Supreme Court, if a parent is spending money in their taxes to pay for public education, then every child in the United States deserves to get that public education, period. Everybody's paying for it, but every child should get it. And so this called for desegregation, meaning Black and white students could go together to public schools. Rosa Parks is also going to be a big name in the news during this time. She was part of the ACLU. She was a tailor in a department store, and she was one of, I believe she was the secretary for not ACLU. Sorry about that. NAACP. And so she was at a lot of the meetings and taking notes and everything. And the NAACP were talking about the issue of segregation on buses. The majority of people who took the bus, especially in Montgomery, Alabama, were Black people because they were using the bus to get from their homes. Most of them lived either in the city center or in the suburbs, and they had to commute to their jobs. They couldn't afford to live right next to their job, so they used the bus to commute to their work. Now, the problem was that the bus lines had a policy that if a white person was on the bus, all Black people had to sit behind the white person. Nobody was allowed to sit in front. No Black person was allowed to sit in the front of the bus. They had to sit in the back of the bus. If a white person was being just a royal jerk and decided that they wanted to sit all the way in the back seat of the bus, Black people had to stand. It was just ridiculous condescension against Black people. So the idea was that they were going to push this issue to make it known among the rest of the United States with the simple idea of hire a Black woman to go and sit in the front of the bus with the knowledge that she will be arrested, and that will make the news, that she was arrested simply for sitting down in the front of the bus. Now, when I say hired, it wasn't a literal, pay for it. It was, a volunteer thing. They chose a girl who was about 17 years old, and she was ready to do this. And then she discovered she was pregnant. And the NAACP said, well, we are not going to put you and your child in danger. That's not going to happen. And at that point, Rosa Parks basically volunteered and said, I'll do it. And they're like, really? And she's like, sure, no problem. So she did it. She went and she sat in the front of the bus. And the bus driver said, you can't do that. She said, I'm not moving. And so they actually went to another stop where the bus driver called the police, and she was taken off the bus and arrested specifically for sitting in the front of the bus. Here is her mugshot. Okay. So at the next stop, the bus driver called the police. Parks was arrested. She was asked by newspapers, why did you sit in the front of the bus? Now, she could have been a smart aleck and said, you know what? Because I can, okay? Because it's a stupid rule that some idiot came up with that I'm not allowed to sit in the front of the bus simply because I'm Black. Instead, what she said was, I was tired. And I can understand that. I can understand her being tired because I can imagine that she probably didn't sleep a whole lot knowing what was going to happen that day. And, she did it after a long day at work, which I'm sure she wasn't doing a whole lot of concentrating as she was doing her tailoring too. But when she said that, I was tired, she struck a nerve in everybody in the United States who gets on the bus at the end of the day when they're just trying to get home. And the idea that this woman would be arrested for this was just so preposterous that people started looking at the South and going, what are y'all doing down there? Y'all acting kind of stupid. Okay. At the same time, a young Black minister named Martin Luther King Jr., who was incredibly precocious, meaning he was very smart for a young age. He got his, he went to finish college before he was even in his 20s. He got his master's, he got his doctorate. He was a full-on, doctor, Martin Luther King. Not a medical doctor, he was a doctor of theology. He stepped forward at this point to help Rosa Parks, and he did that by organizing a bus boycott. The bus companies wanted Black customers because that's how they made their money. But they didn't want to respect their customers by forcing them to sit all the way in the back of the bus. So Martin Luther King Jr. is like, well, here's what we do. Don't ride the bus. We don't have to threaten. We don't have to take them to court. Just don't ride the bus. So a lot of people who needed to commute found alternate ways to commute. A lot of people just walked, as you can see here. Some people, the people they worked for, would come and pick them up in their cars and take them to work. Okay, so it wasn't just the Black citizens of Montgomery. There were a lot of white citizens in Montgomery too who said, this is ridiculous. We need to stop acting like this. The bus company ended up losing money. Oh, shocker, because their customers didn't get on the bus. No black citizens would ride the bus. And that's when they realized that was their customer base and they should probably treat their customers with respect. 1957, the Supreme Court ordered Montgomery to desegregate its bus system. Martin Luther King's civil rights campaign soon spread nationwide. Anytime people saw this kind of racial discrimination, people said, okay, well, what can we do to make this known to the rest of the United States? Because a lot of this was going on in the South and you didn't see it everywhere. And so a lot of people didn't even know that this was going on in some areas. So how do we make this known? How do we show this to people and make them rethink what they're doing? So these nonviolent civil rights protests were happening all over the United States by that time. Some communities refused to obey the Supreme Court order to desegregate schools, so they are breaking the law at that point. Sometimes it was even the governors of states and the mayors of cities that were breaking the law, and they had to be pulled up short. Right now, with everybody having to stay inside, there are governors of certain states who are making up rules, and people are starting to question the rules because the rules don't make any sense. And even after the president and the federal government are saying it's okay now to open your doors and go back to work, you have some people in the state government saying, no, we are not going to let you go back to work. And if you try to, we're going to arrest you. So there's going to be a big turnover the next election. You're going to see a lot of these mayors and governors they're going to lose their next election because of the way they've acted during this quarantine. In 1957, Governor Orville E. Faubus of Arkansas, he said, I am not going to integrate my schools. Not going to do it. Arkansas has always had a division between black and white. We have the Jim Crow laws that we've passed. We are not going to do this. And so even though the federal government said you have to now integrate your schools, he's going to disobey that law and make up his own law. And he's going to do it by overstepping his bounds in a big way. He is going to use the Arkansas National Guard to go and guard the school from 999 black students who are getting ready to go to high school. So he's going to order the National Guard to block 9 students. Seem like overkill? Yeah, everybody else did too. And they also said, how come you're allowed to break the law, but nobody else is? A law for me and not for thee? Thank you. So this is what the Little Rock Nine were having to go through. They were called that because there were 9 students who were going to a black school in Little Rock, Arkansas, who were at the very tippy top of their class. They were doing remarkable work. They were also from homes where they were taught good manners. They were clean. They were neat. They were chosen to be the face of black education and a way to show, look at how much more these kids could achieve if they were in a really good school, not one of the schools that's considered separate but equal, because the black schools were notoriously bad when it came to upkeep, when it came to materials that they read in the classroom. They got the older books, they got broken furniture. And so this was a chance to really say the separate but equal thing was never okay, because it's never been separate but equal. We want our kids to be able to go to a school that is well run, that is nice, that is safe, and where they can get a good education. So yeah, this is when a lot of people just went way off the rails. Okay, so let's talk about what we're seeing here. This guy is saying, Governor Faubus, save our Christian America. There is no part about racism that is Christian at all. Not a bit. Not ever. This goes directly against all the teachings in the Bible. All of it. According to Acts, we are all of one blood. We are brothers and sisters in Christ. We are to reach the entire world, go into all the world and teach all nations. God has never put an issue of race in the Bible where people are to be discriminated against specifically because of their race. That is just ridiculous. And this other person saying race mixing is communism, grow up, please. Okay, let's not even get on board there. That's ridiculous. Okay, President Eisenhower saw what Faubus did, and he didn't like it. So he's going to take the overkill of Faubus, and he's going to dramatically see that overkill and make it overkill. Okay? He's going to call his bluff. Faubus brings out the National Guard to keep students from going into a school. President Eisenhower sent 1,000 federal paratroopers. These are hardcore guys who jump out of airplanes for a living, strapped with guns and everything else you can think of as they jump out of airplanes, strapped to parachutes. He sends 1,000 federal paratroopers to Little Rock to guard 9 Black students as they go into the local high school. Guess what? Federal paratroopers trump National Guard. So yeah, after that, the school was integrated. And unfortunately, we have to talk about this part of American history too. Unfortunately, there were a lot of people in the South who were calling themselves Christians, but who weren't living like Christians, who said, I'm not going to put my child in a public school with Black students. Oh no, that's not going to start. So instead, they started schools within their churches, and they called them Christian schools, but they were basically segregated schools where Black students weren't allowed. There is nothing about that is Christian, and that just needs to be talked about, and it needs to be gotten away with. We need to stop that kind of garbage. I've been teaching for 18 years, and I have the school I went to when I was in high school. Yeah, there was a lot of racism there, but I didn't see it from my principal. I saw it from the pastor who was there, and I saw it from some of the students. And honestly, I couldn't wait to get out of there. Okay? A lot of the people in my school were not like that at all, but you always have a couple who are. And even as a teacher, I've seen students where a couple of them will be just racist jerks. And you just want to sit them down and say, you realize you're not like the greatest person, right? Now, I can't say that as a teacher. I can't sit a kid down and say, you're kind of a jerk. And when you talk about somebody else being stupid or, don't deserve to be here because they're of a different color, you realize that you're the one that's being in the wrong here. You're the one being a jerk. There have been so many times when I've run across this kind of racism in the classroom, and I can usually put a stop to it just by, talking about what race is and all of that. But you're always going to come across people who believe that they are better than everybody else. And it's not just unfortunate, it's ungodly to the extreme. And to make a decision that you're not going to like somebody based on the color of their skin or the shade of color in their skin is just one of the stupidest things you could possibly do. It's just awful. Here are the Little Rock 9. Dressed nice, looking presentable. Their teacher in the top left row, she's to the left in the top row. Very proud of these young men and women. You can see it on her face. Okay. Martin Luther King Jr. helped form the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and that group pledged itself to nonviolent resistance in the struggle for civil rights. He's going to use Christ as his example first, but then he's also going to really dig into the life of Gandhi, because Gandhi, after World War II, was leading his people in India to break away from Great Britain so they could get their independence. And one of the things that the Native Indians were having an issue with was the racism that came with British control and British colonialism. And so he was watching, Martin Luther King Jr. was very interested in Gandhi's life because Gandhi used nonviolent approaches to protest against British rule. And so he wanted to apply that same information to the civil rights movement. in the South. So in this struggle for civil rights, they planned marches and demonstrations specifically to protest racial segregation, meaning that black and white should be able to work and live side by side. There should not be any segregation whatsoever. At the end of President Eisenhower's second four-year term, Republicans chose Vice President Richard M. Nixon, and the Democrats chose a very unusual candidate. They chose John Fitzgerald Kennedy. With everything that was going on in the South, they didn't want a Southerner because a lot of the Southern Democrats were not being looked at too fondly by the rest of the United States because of the issues that were going on in the South. They also chose a man who was a Roman Catholic, which we had never had a Roman Catholic president before. Nixon was actually considered Quaker, but we'd had a previous Quaker. And so when the two parties chose their men, it was really obvious why Nixon was chosen, because he was the vice president. He was already big name recognition. But Kennedy seemed to come out of nowhere unless you lived on the East Coast. People on the East Coast knew who he and his family were. His father became really famous because he made a lot of money during Prohibition, wink, wink, possibly from moonshine and becoming a distributor for alcohol. But he used that money to parlay that into political favors and eventually became high up in politics and became the ambassador to Great Britain. The boys that he had 3 sons, and the oldest was JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and then his brother Robert, and then his youngest brother Theodore, or Teddy Kennedy. He was looking to build a dynasty in politics. Now they were living in Massachusetts, but JFK actually moved to New York and became a senator from New York. And so people knew him if they were on the East Coast. When these two men started debating over, why each one of them should be president, and they were talking about the issues of the day, television was going to play a huge role in that campaign. There was a series of 4 televised debates. Nixon and Kennedy faced each other before the cameras while the nation watched. And when people were asked later what they thought of the debates, because that's what they do like polling after the debates. Who do you think did the best job in the debate? The people who listened to the debates said Nixon was straight on. He was on, he knew his stuff, and he was the one who won the debate. Those, however, who saw the debate take place on television, they voted in favor of Kennedy. They said, well, we watched the debates. Kennedy looked energetic. He looked youthful. He's relaxed. He's friendly. He's much better looking than Nixon. And so they looked at him and said he won the debate, but he won it from their point of view because he looked more confident than Nixon did. And Nixon even did a really, he tried a new product in one of his debates. He got in, he flew in and he was getting to the studio a little bit late, and he was trying a brand new product called Beard Be Gone. He had really, really heavy 5 o'clock shadow, and he didn't have time to shave before the debate. So he's using this Beard Be Gone, and it was basically like foundation makeup, and he rubbed that all over his beard before he went out on stage. And then you put bright lights on that kind of cosmetic and it just started melting. So he was like mopping himself up the entire time. It made him look really bad because he was sweating so bad that people were like, is this guy really honest? And it's like, didn't look good. So most people who listened to the debates on the radio said Nixon actually won the debates. Television had a far greater impact. Now, when it finally came down to the time when people are voting between these two men, it's going to be an extremely, extremely close race. Very, very close. But the win is going to go to Kennedy. He won the election by 118,000 votes. That's really not how we do the vote thing. I don't know why your book puts that in there. That's the popular vote. We do not choose our presidents through popular vote. We choose through the Electoral College. So the Electoral College vote was actually 303 to 219, which is really the closest presidential race of the 20th century up to that time. Remember that the electoral votes is to allow everybody in the country to get their vote counted rather than just the president being chosen only by a few big cities. Okay, so if you want to watch a really good explanation of that, of why the Electoral College is absolutely vital to the American voting system, you need to go on PragerU on YouTube and type it in. PragerU Electoral College, and they will break it all down for you. It's really, really important. Okay, John F. Kennedy became the very first Roman Catholic president of the United States. And a lot of people looked at that and they said, well, he's a family man. I mean, he's got a beautiful wife. They have children. She was actually pregnant when they first moved into the White House. So everybody was excited about, baby being born. Unfortunately, she lost the baby. But people were excited about having someone who was very religious and very family oriented. Then some stuff came out later, found out that just because he called himself Roman Catholic doesn't mean he was necessarily a great guy. Okay, in 1959, the communist dictator Fidel Castro took control of Cuba. He deceived the Cuban people into believing that he was going to liberate the working class. It's the same old lie that communists tell every time. Follow me. We will wipe out the top producers of the country. You will get all their stuff and you will be liberated. You will be able to live freely and the government will take care of you. It never happens that way, but people love that lie. So he told everybody he was going to liberate the working class from the dictator, Batista. He says there's too many rich people in Cuba. We're going to get rid of all the rich people. And then all the middle class, all those workers, you are going to be liberated. You can do what you want then. We will take care of you. Exact opposite happened, of course. Once he's in power, he admitted he was a communist. He quickly set up a communist dictatorship in Cuba where, shockingly, everybody got their stuff pretty much taken away. And he told everybody exactly how they were to live every moment of every day. Where you could live, what you could plant, what you could eat, where you could go. All of that was now controlled by the government. And he did this communist takeover with the help of his brother Raul, who was on the left on the bottom picture, and his close friend that he and Raul met while banished from Cuba and living in Mexico for a short time, a man named Che Guevara, who was also a communist and very diehard communist. He was a firm believer in communism. He did not even like money. He thought money was just, propaganda and awful and should be done away with. No money. Okay. In April of 1961, there was an American-trained force of Cuban freedom fighters. These were people who escaped from Cuba and that communist dictatorship. They were trained in the United States, and they were going to go back and invade Cuba and rescue the people from the communist dictatorship of Fidel, Raul, and Che. Okay, that was the plan. Why did people need to be rescued from this dictatorship? Because people were getting killed if they didn't agree with communism. Che Guevara was in charge of firing squads. He had hundreds and hundreds of people killed. He built concentration camps and made sure people were put in them. He was also put in charge of the treasury. They took the guy who hates money, like as even a concept, and they put him in charge of the treasury. So they went bankrupt almost immediately. But he signed the money, Che, which wasn't even his real name, but he used it all the time as an affectation. Like, I have a cousin from Canada who, when she would come visit me, she'd go, eh, all the time. Well, it's the same kind of thing, but it's Che, or like we'd say in, Western United States, like, or or you see, or okay. So these freedom fighters, they were trying to get back to Cuba and free the people of Cuba, because they were under a communist dictatorship now. President Kennedy was supposed to give the brave men American air cover and support. That was the deal. They were trained in the United States. They were told by the American government, when you go and you attack and you free your own country, we will give you air support. Kennedy didn't follow through on that promise. At the last minute, he backed away from that promise and the invasion failed. And a lot of people in the United States were so angry at Kennedy, he lost a lot of public support as a result of that. People, the Cuban people of America, were not happy with this man at all. He's going to make the people of the United States look very, very weak in the face of this upstart communist dictator in Cuba. It doesn't look good that you would just bow to this man. People are going to be, that's not a good look for you, babe. Conservatives became incredibly concerned that communist Cuba could be used as a launching pad for communist attacks on America. Guess what? That's exactly what Che Guevara was planning. Okay. Now, conservatives are being concerned about this. They said, look, we need to get rid of this guy. And then the Bay of Pigs fiasco happened. And of course, at the same time, you're having the news crews constantly saying, people are just being a little paranoid. People are just being paranoid. They're not really going to attack us. Well, it turns out that Che Guevara had made a deal with Russia, the USSR, to have missile sites in Cuba. Look at where the missile sites are on this map. They are aiming directly at the United States. That was the whole point. And they're not just missiles, they are nuclear missiles, which means you just don't get the impact, you also get the fallout, the nuclear fallout. So once this was discovered, the news stations started changing their tune and saying, oh no, what are we going to do now? We'll start teaching people how to protect themselves in case of a nuclear attack. And then came some of the stupidest, just most asinine teaching that went on in American schools and even in news programs, newsreels before movies. I mean, this was being shown everywhere. It was the duck and cover. And it was just the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen. They would tell students, okay, if we are attacked by nuclear missiles, this is what you do. Get under your desk and cover your head. What is that going to do? If you're out on the street, when you hear the sirens go off, put something over your head. If you have a textbook, open it, put it on your head, and lay down on the ground. Why? It's a nuclear missile. That's not going to help you at all. They even told adults who were being filmed doing this, if you hear the alarm go off, cover your head, even if it's just with a newspaper. A newspaper? We saw what happened with Nagasaki and Hiroshima. People burned to ash in seconds. Some people were so completely annihilated, their shadows were left behind. That was it. You want the people of the United States to start laying down and putting textbooks and newspapers over their heads? Yes, that's what was being taught. We don't want to panic Americans, but this is what you can do. Well, a lot of Americans were like, if I hear the alarm going off, I'm going underground. And suddenly there was this huge call for bunkers in the United States, nuclear bomb shelters. So people would have a bomb shelter put in their backyard. If they heard that alarm, they weren't going to fool around with newspapers and textbooks. They were getting in the bomb shelter. That became a thing. Now, after the failure of the Bay of Pigs, the Soviet leader was like, so they're not willing to fight against the communists anymore. Not like their previous president, who was so tough as nails. So he says, okay, then I'm going to just take over West Berlin then. It's right there. Kennedy, at that point, realized he better step up pretty fast or the people of the United States were going to kick his butt out of office. So he told Khrushchev that if he tried to invade West Berlin, that the United States would send armed forces to keep West Berlin free from communism. He even went to West Berlin to speak. And he said, look, I'm going to stand right up and say, I am with the people of Berlin. right now at this time, I am a Berliner. You cannot allow communism to take this over. We will support you and protect you from communism in West Berlin. West Berlin was a sore spot for the Soviets. Over 4,000 East Germans per week were escaping to freedom in West Berlin. The communists could not keep people in their country. Freedom was right across a bunch of barbed wire, and they were taking advantage of it. They wanted to leave communism and get into a capitalist society as fast as they possibly could, and that made communism look really bad. Because people who are actually living in communism will tell you, it is horrendous. It is awful. Stay away from it. People who are in capitalist societies who don't know how good they have it will say, well, maybe we can do communism if we do it our way. No, it doesn't work. Stop being such a jerk. Communism doesn't work. 4,000 people per week escaping to freedom in West Berlin. This made communism look really bad in the eyes of the world. The economy of East Germany could not lose any more skilled labor to the West. They were losing their slave labor force. On August 13th, 1961, the communists solved that problem by putting a barbed wire fence between East and West Berlin, making it taller, making it bigger, putting guards there, and then they're going to build a permanent wall. A solid cement block wall arose. It's called the Berlin Wall. It was a grim monument to the failure of communism. As this wall is being made, you can see people on both sides of the wall going, okay, well, I have family right on the other side. They're not going to see their family again. There's no way to get over that wall. There was one place called Checkpoint Charlie, which was the only way you could get through, and you had to have special permission. Some people did still escape over the wall, but it was really, really dangerous, and the escape was a trickle. This is really the only time ever in history that a wall was built to keep people in a country instead of keeping them out of a country. In June of 1963, Kennedy visited West Berlin, and he personally assured the people that the United States would protect them from communist aggression. They would be protected. That's when he said, I see myself as a Berliner too. But what he said was, he said, I am a Berliner, not realizing that the form of word he used for Berliner actually referred to donut. So he said, I'm a jelly-filled donut. But the people of Berlin were actually very kind to him and didn't laugh outright when he said that. They were just like, oh, we know what you're trying to say. You didn't say that, but we know, we get it. And thank you. No. October 1962, the president ordered a naval blockade around Cuba to keep the Soviet Union from shipping missiles and nuclear warheads from the island to the island, because Cuba is only 90 miles away from Florida. The truth was, the weapons were already there. He got the information a little bit late or acted on it a little late, depending on how you want to read that information. But the weapons were already there. There were already missiles on missile sites aiming to the United States. And guess who was in charge of those missile sites? Che Guevara. He is not a good guy. At first, the Soviet leader, Khrushchev, he refused to back down. He said, I have the right to trade with Cuba if I want to. We're both communist nations. We should have freedom of trade. Imagine a communist saying that. We should have freedom of trade between us. But Kennedy is finding his backbone and saying, no. You guys can trade. I don't care about that. But you cannot bring nuclear weapons to Cuba and then they aim them at us. That's not going to happen. There were 14 days in October where this argument was going on, and that was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it made shockwaves around the world. People were actually sitting on the edge of their chair waiting to find out how this would work out, because they were scared to death that this was going to start a nuclear holocaust throughout the entire world. There's even an episode of Call the Midwife where the whole episode is about everybody just on pins and needles waiting to find out if this is ever going to be solved, or if they have to prepare for nuclear disaster not too long after World War II. Kennedy remained firm. The United States, thanks to military planning and economic prosperity, had a clear weapons advantage over the Soviet Union, which meant the Soviet Union could shoot missiles into the United States, but we had more missiles that we could shoot into Soviet space. Nobody's going to win that war, but we have more weapons. So the United States is going to be like, if you attack us, we will attack you harder and faster. And that's what really made the USSR back down. And Castro arranged for those nuclear weapons to be returned, some of them returned, to Russia. And that started a huge fight between him and Che Guevara. So communists were forced to stop sending nuclear weapons, and they were supposed to remove nuclear weapons already in Cuba. And that became a fight because are we sure that all the weapons are gone? UN, you need to go in there and investigate and make sure they are. In return, Kennedy made a promise that no American president would ever invade Cuba and deliver it from communist control. That is going to tick off all of the Cuban refugees who came to the United States after fleeing communist Cuba. They're going to say, we could have taken it over, but no, this is part of the compromise they had to come to in order to get rid of those nuclear weapons. So that started the fight between Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. At that point, Che was so angry that Castro was on the side of Russia and they were backing down because he wanted to annihilate the United States because how dare they be capitalist. And so at that point, Castro said, why don't you just, go back home to your home country and try to start something there. And he did. He went back to his home country and started a communist revolution there, basically forcing people into his guerrilla army, trying to overthrow the government. And then he was causing so much havoc, and the government of his original country appealed to the United States. You got to help us out with this guy. And the United States sent CIA agents there to assassinate him. He was assassinated and killed. That was the end of Che Guevara. So, except for today, because people are so happy about the idea of communism, they look at Che Guevara as being this freedom fighter. He was not. He was a murderer. People will wear t-shirts with Che Guevara's image on them. He would have hated that because people were paying money to get that t-shirt, and he was anti-capitalism. He was not a freedom fighter. He was absolutely a murderer, and he was assassinated because he was trying to overthrow a government that the majority of people in his country wanted to be in place. It's that simple. Not a good guy. Don't buy his t-shirts. You look like an idiot when you wear a t-shirt of Che Guevara. In 1963, both the United States and the USSR installed a hotline providing instant communication between the two countries. That hotline included the red phone that was carried wherever the president went. And that was specifically to keep an eye on what the other one was doing when it came to our nuclear missiles being launched. Are you doing this right now? Yes, I am. Okay, we'll get ready because I'm going to send one back. Okay, this really kept them at a balance so that they wouldn't try anything. Is really what it was about. And it was to allow them to talk without actually firing a shot. In 1961, President Kennedy established a government program known as the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps. It sent out volunteers to improve the health and farming practices of poor rural villages around the world. And it was there to help people take care of themselves. That was the whole purpose of the Peace Corps. It was very different from today's Democratic Party, which is all about, we just want to send money. We just want to send medical care. We want to build the schools for you. We want to do everything for you rather than we are here to help you fix things yourself. President Kennedy also established the Alliance for Progress that followed up on FDR's Good Neighbor policy, allowing businesses to interact with each other without a lot of government interference and oversight. And then the U.S. ended up spending several $billions on that program, but the progress was really slow because the issue that was the biggest issue in Latin America at the time was the spiritual problems that were going on. Okay, there were some spiritual problems that lay at the root of Latin America's economic and political difficulties. You had people in charge who were really, really corrupt, and they were ripping off the people of their own countries. And that's going to cause that issue to be a problem that's not really solvable. It can't be solvable just with money exchanging hands. It has to be solvable when somebody says, I'm not going to behave badly anymore, and turning to Christ for examples on how to behave the right way. Okay, we're going to stop right there and pick up on the civil rights part 2 next time. That was our time. So I hope you guys have a really good day. I will probably just go ahead and do more lectures tomorrow, even though I don't usually do them on Wednesday. That's going to have to stop. I have to just keep going. So I will do 2 more lectures tomorrow because we're getting close to the end and we're running out of time, and we got to get through the book, and I really want to make it all the way through. So you have a really good day. Finish up your homework a little bit at a time. I will talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.